Poor black girl saw all ignore the deaf daughter of the billionaire until she spoke in signs. The first time Talia Brooks noticed Aloan Kingsley, she wasn't dazzled by the designer coat the girl wore or the private chauffeur waiting in the silver Bentley by the curb. No, what Talia noticed were the eyes, pale icy blue staring out at a world that seemed determined to pretend she wasn't there. Aloan's lips never moved, but her fingers did, quick, sharp motions like secret whispers her body carried when her voice could not. And no one seemed to care. Not her classmates, not the teachers who rushed past in polished heels, not even the security guards who opened doors for her father. Everyone saw Aloan, but they didn't see her. They looked through her like she was invisible. But Talia saw everything. It was the second week of school, and already Talia understood the rules of Crestwood Academy, the wealthiest, whitest private school in all of Vermont. If you had money, you mattered. If you didn't, you were a shadow on the wall, easily forgotten. And Talia, she was the shadow. Her mother had worked 3 jobs just to get her into Crestwood on a partial scholarship. The uniform alone nearly drained their savings. Every morning, Talia scrubbed her shoes until the leather shone, trying to erase the scuffs that screamed poor. But no matter how hard she tried, her classmates always reminded her of what she was. "Why do you even bother?" snickered Madison Clark, the girl with braids so tight they looked painful. "You'll never fit in here." Laughter followed like hyenas circling prey. But Talia didn't bite back. She kept her head down, pretending their words rolled off her, yet her chest burned every time like a match that refused to die out. That morning, though, as she passed the front courtyard, she saw something that made her slow her steps. Aloan stood alone by the fountain. Her blonde hair gleamed like a curtain of silk, but her shoulders hunched inward, small and breakable. 2 girls stood a few feet away, Cameron and Leela, giggling behind manicured hands. They pointed at Aloan's moving fingers. "She looks like a broken robot," Cameron whispered loudly. "Seriously," Leela laughed. "What's the point of signing when nobody can even understand her?" The words cut through the air like glass. Talia clenched her fists. She wanted to say something, but her throat locked tight. Confronting Madison was one thing, but these girls were friends with Aloan's father, the billionaire himself, the kind of man who owned half the companies in Vermont. Instead, she lingered on the edge of the crowd, watching. Aloan's face didn't flinch. She just kept moving her hands in small, precise motions, ignoring the laughter. But Talia could see it. Her pale fingers trembled, just barely betraying her. And then something happened. For the briefest second, Aloan's gaze lifted. She looked right at Talia, past the crowd, past the whispers, past the invisible wall that separated rich from poor. Their eyes locked. And Talia understood. It wasn't pity, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. Because just like Talia, Aloan lived in silence. Not the kind without sound, but the kind where no one really listened. The Kingsley name carried weight heavier than iron. Nicholas Kingsley wasn't just rich, he was power. He built empires out of steel and glass, men knelt at his boardroom tables, and politicians whispered his name with either envy or fear. And yet, with all his might, he could not give his daughter a voice. Talia had only seen him once, striding across the school grounds with a presence that swallowed everything around him. He wore power like a second skin, tailored suits, polished shoes, a gaze that could cut stone. The teachers practically bowed in his direction. But when he walked past Aloan, Talia noticed something chilling. He didn't slow down, he didn't smile, he didn't bend to sign a hello. He walked past his own daughter like she was an accessory, a shadow much like Talia herself. That afternoon, Talia stayed behind in the library, her fingers tracing the rough edges of a borrowed notebook. She had homework to finish, but her mind kept circling back to Aloan's trembling hands. When she finally packed up, the campus was almost empty. The echo of her shoes carried down the marble hall, and that's when she saw her again. Aloan sat at the far end of the hallway, knees pulled tight to her chest, hair spilling across her face like a curtain. No chauffeur, no friends, just silence. Something in Talia stirred. Against her better judgment, she walked forward, each step louder than the last. Aloan looked up, her eyes widened, startled, and she wiped quickly at her face. But not fast enough. Talia saw the shine of tears. "Hey," Talia whispered, her voice gentle, uncertain. Aloan blinked, her lips parted but no sound came. Her hands twitched like she wanted to speak but stopped. Talia's stomach twisted. She didn't know sign language, she didn't know how to reach across that silence. So she did the only thing she could. She sat down on the floor beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them was empty, hushed. And then slowly, Aloan raised her hands. Her fingers moved, uncertain but deliberate. Talia didn't understand the shapes, but she understood the meaning. Because for the first time, Aloan wasn't invisible. Someone was watching, someone was listening. And Talia knew deep down that everything was about to change. The marble floor was cold against Talia's legs, but she didn't move. She sat there in silence, her backpack sliding off her shoulder, forgotten. Across from her, Aloan's pale fingers still shifted, hesitant yet urgent, like they were trying to pull words out of a storm. Talia bit her lip, her chest tightening. She hated herself for not knowing what those hands meant. Every motion was a story, a plea, a confession wrapped in silence, and she couldn't catch it. But she didn't leave. Aloan paused, her hands falling into her lap. The look she gave Talia was sharp, almost defiant, as if to say, "Will you turn away like everyone else?" Talia's voice cracked when she finally spoke. I don't know sign language," she admitted, "but I can try if you want to teach me." The words hung in the hallway like smoke. For a long moment, Aloan only studied her, her head tilted slightly, hair glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. Then, unexpectedly, she gave a tiny shake of her head. "No." Talia frowned. "No." Aloan pointed at her own chest, then at Talia's. She spread her fingers wide, then clasped them together in an awkward, jerky motion. Her brow furrowed with concentration, as though she were struggling to build a bridge between them. Talia squinted. She had no idea what that meant, but she understood one thing clearly enough. Aloan wasn't asking her to learn just for the sake of pity. She was asking for something real, something equal. And it scared Talia. The following days blurred into routine, but nothing felt the same. In class, Talia found herself glancing toward the corner seat where Aloan sat, always silent, always ignored. The teachers barely looked at her, reading lessons aloud without sparing a thought for whether she could follow along. And the students, they didn't even bother whispering insults anymore. To them, Aloan wasn't worth the energy. But Talia watched. Every flick of her hand, every small twitch of her fingers. She tried to memorize the shapes even if she didn't understand them. At night, she pulled out the old laptop her mother had bought from a thrift shop and searched videos on American Sign Language. ABCD. Her hands felt clumsy, her movements stiff, but she kept practicing until her fingers ached. Because Talia had decided, if the world wasn't going to listen to Aloan, then she would. By the end of the week, she tried her first word. It was in the cafeteria, noisy and packed with laughter that never seemed to reach their table. Aloan sat alone with her untouched tray, stirring mashed potatoes with a plastic fork. Talia sat across from her, heart hammering. She waited until Aloan glanced up, and then clumsily she raised her hand and signed hello. Aloan froze. Her pale eyes widened, darting from Talia's hand to her face. For a moment she looked almost angry, like the gesture was an intrusion, but then slowly her lips curved into something small and fragile, a smile. She lifted her own hand and signed back, fluid and graceful, hello. It was one word, one spark, but to Talia it felt like lightning. What Talia didn't know was that eyes were already watching. At the far end of the cafeteria, Nicholas Kingsley stood with the headmaster, his tailored suit sharp enough to cut glass. His gaze swept the room with cold calculation, but it stopped when it landed on Aloan. And then on Talia. The headmaster followed his eyes. "Ah, yes, that, Talia Brooks, one of our scholarship students, bright girl though her background is modest." Nicholas's lips tightened, his jaw shifted, unreadable. He said nothing. But in his silence, a storm was already building. The next week was harder. Every attempt Talia made at signing came with mistakes. Sometimes Aloan laughed softly, silent laughter, shoulders shaking, eyes brighter than Talia had ever seen them. Sometimes she grew frustrated, shaking her head and covering her face with her hands. But she never walked away. Piece by piece, a fragile bond began to weave between them. It showed in small ways. The way Aloan saved Talia a seat at the back of class. The way Talia slid half her sandwich across the table when she noticed Aloan never touched her own lunch. The way they lingered by the fountain long after the other students left, practicing words with clumsy hands and patient eyes. And then came the first secret. One chilly afternoon, Aloan tugged Talia by the sleeve and pulled her toward the old music room at the edge of campus. Dust clung to the piano keys, the smell of forgotten years thick in the air. Aloan sat at the piano and looked at her. Then she lifted her hands not to sign but to play. The notes were soft at first, hesitant. But as her fingers moved, the melody swelled, haunting and beautiful, filling the empty room with a voice Aloan had never been given. Talia stood frozen, her throat aching. She wanted to cry, though she didn't know why. When the song ended, Aloan glanced at her, waiting for judgment, for rejection. Instead, Talia clapped loud and fierce, like the sound could break the silence that had caged Aloan for so long. Aloan smiled wide and real, her cheeks flushing pink. She signed quickly, "Thank you." And Talia knew she'd just been trusted with something no one else had seen. But every secret carried a cost. That night, Talia walked home through the narrow streets of her neighborhood. The streetlights flickered and her backpack weighed heavy with books she barely had time to read. She thought of Aloan's smile, of the piano notes still echoing in her chest. But when she stepped into her apartment, reality crashed back. Her mother sat slumped at the kitchen table, her work uniform stained with grease. Bills were scattered across the surface like broken glass. "Talia," her mother said, her voice weary, "we can't keep this up. Crestwood's too much. I don't know how much longer I can cover the rest of the tuition." Talia's chest tightened. She wanted to scream that she couldn't leave, that she'd just found something worth staying for, but the words stuck in her throat. She swallowed hard and nodded, pretending to understand, pretending not to break. The next morning, Nicholas Kingsley arrived on campus. He didn't come alone. 2 men in black suits followed him, their presence heavy as stone. He walked with the headmaster toward Aloan's classroom, his stride sharp, his expression unreadable. When he stepped inside, the students fell silent, the room bent to his gravity. But Aloan did not look up. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the desk. Nicholas's gaze swept the room, cold and exact, and when it landed on Talia, it lingered. Long enough to make her stomach twist, long enough for her to know he'd seen. He knew. And in that moment, Talia realized something terrifying. Being Aloan's friend wasn't just an act of kindness anymore. It was dangerous. Because Nicholas Kingsley wasn't a man who liked shadows noticing his daughter. And Talia was a shadow daring to step into the light. The moment Nicholas Kingsley's gaze landed on her, Talia felt the air squeeze tight in her lungs. It wasn't just a look. It was a warning. A man like him didn't need words to make his intentions clear. His eyes were enough. The headmaster's voice droned in the background, all polished pleasantries, but Talia barely heard. All she could feel was the weight of that stare pressing into her like an iron brand. Aloan sat perfectly still, not daring to move. Her pale fingers twitched in her lap, small and frantic, but hidden under the desk where no one could see, except Talia. And for the first time, Talia realized Aloan was just as afraid of him as she was. After class, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see him?" Cameron hissed to Leela in the hallway. "Nicholas Kingsley in person, he's terrifying." "Terrifyingly rich," Leela corrected, laughing. "God, imagine having that much money." But Talia wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the way Nicholas hadn't spoken a single word to Aloan. Not hello, not goodbye, not even a glance that acknowledged her existence as his daughter. He had walked into that classroom, frozen the world with his presence, and then walked out again. And the only mark he left was the silence he buried Aloan deeper into. That afternoon, Talia found Aloan in the library. She was sitting by the tall windows, sunlight pouring over her hair like liquid gold. A book lay open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. She was staring at the page as if it were blank. When Talia slid into the chair beside her, Aloan didn't move. Slowly, cautiously, Talia raised her hands and signed, "You okay?" Her movements were clumsy, but Aloan's eyes flickered with recognition. She hesitated, then lifted her hands to respond. "Not okay," she signed back. Her motions were sharp, almost angry, then she jabbed a finger at the book, slammed it shut, and shoved it aside. Talia's chest ached. She wanted to say something, anything. But before she could try, Elowen reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She slid it across the table. Talia unfolded it. The handwriting was small and neat. "He doesn't see me, he never will." The words blurred in Talia's vision. She wanted to say it wasn't true, that Nicholas cared deep down, but she couldn't force a lie past her lips because she'd seen it herself. He didn't see Elowen, not really. And that realization was like a knife in her chest. But Talia wasn't the kind of girl who stayed quiet, not forever. That evening, as she walked home through the crisp Vermont air, she thought of her mother again, tired, struggling, drowning under bills. She thought of her scholarship that could vanish at any moment. She thought of Nicholas Kingsley's stare, of Elowen's trembling hands. The shadows of her neighborhood seemed thicker that night. The broken street lamps hummed, and in the darkness she made a decision. If Nicholas Kingsley wouldn't see his daughter, then Talia would. Even if it cost her everything. The next morning, Talia found Elowen by the fountain again. Alone, as always, she approached, ignoring the sharp looks from the other students. "Elowen," she whispered, her breath clouding in the cool air. She raised her hands and signed, awkward but determined, "I see you." The words weren't perfect. She had to repeat the gesture twice before it looked right. But when Elowen understood, her entire face changed. Her lips parted in shock, then slowly she smiled, not the small, careful smiles she'd given before, but something bigger, brighter. And in that moment, the bond between them solidified. They weren't just classmates anymore. They weren't just two girls surviving in a world that wanted them invisible. They were allies. But allies attract enemies. Later that day, as Talia left her math class, Madison Clark stepped into her path. Her polished shoes clicked against the floor as she crossed her arms, smirking. "Well, well," Madison drawled. "Look who thinks she's special now, Shadow Girl and the Mute Princess, cute." Her friends laughed behind her, cruel and sharp. Talia stiffened, her fists clenching at her sides. She wanted to walk past, but Madison leaned closer, her perfume cloying in the air. "You really think you'll last here?" Madison sneered. "My dad says Kingsley doesn't like distractions, and you're a distraction." Talia froze. Madison's smirk widened at the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Careful, Brooks, some shadows aren't meant to step into the light." And with that she walked away, her laughter echoing down the hall. That night Talia couldn't sleep. Madison's words rattled inside her skull. Kingsley doesn't like distractions. Was she right? Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "We can't keep this up, Talia. Crestwood's too much." If Nicholas wanted her gone, he could make it happen with a single phone call. She'd lose her scholarship. Her mother would lose everything she'd sacrificed for. But then she remembered Elowen's smile at the fountain, the way her fingers had stilled when Talia signed, "I see you." And she knew. Even if Nicholas Kingsley tried to erase her, she couldn't leave. Not now, not when Elowen had finally been seen. The next day, everything shifted. Talia walked into the cafeteria to find silence. Dozens of students were staring at a single table, the one Elowen sat at. But this time she wasn't alone. Nicholas Kingsley stood behind her, his hand heavy on her shoulder, his cold gaze sweeping the room. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. And when his eyes found Talia, he didn't look away. He was waiting. A challenge. And in that moment, Talia understood. Nicholas had noticed the shadow. And now he was deciding whether to snuff it out. Nicholas Kingsley's stare was a blade, cold, precise, and impossible to ignore. Talia felt it slice through her as she sat frozen in the cafeteria, her tray untouched. The room was quiet, too quiet. Dozens of students who usually filled the air with chatter now kept their heads down, afraid to breathe wrong in the presence of Crestwood's most powerful parent. Elowen sat stiffly at the table, her pale fingers clenched in her lap. Nicholas's hand rested heavy on her shoulder, not comforting, controlling, claiming. When his eyes finally moved from Talia, the air loosened just slightly. He gave Elowen's shoulder a small squeeze, leaned down, and whispered something in her ear. She flinched, her body going rigid, but she didn't look up. Then he straightened, nodded once at the headmaster standing nearby, and left. His polished shoes echoed like a gavel striking judgment. And just like that, the cafeteria roared back to life. But the damage was done. Nicholas Kingsley had noticed Talia. And that meant everything was about to change. After school, Talia lingered by the fountain, waiting. The courtyard was nearly empty when Aloan appeared, her steps hesitant. Talia stood quickly, heart pounding. "Hey," she whispered. Aloan stopped a few feet away. Her eyes darted nervously, her hands twitching at her sides. Finally, she raised them and signed quickly, her motions jagged, rushed. "Stay away." The words hit Talia like a slap. "What, why?" Aloan shook her head violently, her lips parted but no sound came. She raised her hands again, slower this time, forcing Talia to watch. "He will hurt you." Talia's throat closed. For a long moment they stood there, the fountain's spray hissing between them. Finally, Talia swallowed hard. "I'm not afraid of him." Aloan's eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow and maybe anger. She signed again, sharp and trembling. "You should be." And then she turned and walked away. That night, Talia sat at the kitchen table with her mother. Bills were spread out like battlefield wounds, her mother's forehead creased as she punched numbers into a calculator. "Talia," her mother said, her voice rough with exhaustion, "did something happen at school?" Talia froze. "Why?" Her mother pushed a letter across the table. It was printed on Crestwood Academy's expensive stationery. Talia read it once, twice, and her stomach dropped. It was a warning, a reminder that scholarship students were expected to uphold standards of behavior, that distractions from academics would not be tolerated. Her hands shook as she shoved the paper back. Her mother frowned. "What does this mean? Did you get in trouble?" "No," Talia whispered, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. "It's nothing, I'll fix it." But deep down she knew exactly what it was. Nicholas Kingsley had started his game. The next week was a gauntlet. Suddenly, every teacher seemed sharper with her, every small mistake was magnified, every late assignment criticized. Whispers followed her in the hallways. "Kingsley doesn't like her. She won't last the semester. She should never have been here." But Talia gritted her teeth and endured it. Because she couldn't walk away, not when Aloan still looked at her with those pale, pleading eyes. One afternoon, as they sat in the dusty music room, Aloan signed carefully. "Why do you keep trying?" Talia hesitated, then lifted her own hands. Her signing was clumsy, but she forced the words out anyway. "Because you matter." Aloan froze, her lips trembled, and for a second Talia thought she might cry. Instead, Aloan reached out and touched her wrist lightly, like testing if she was real. Then she signed back. No one has ever said that before. The weight of that truth settled over them both. But the fragile piece shattered 2 days later. Talia was called to the headmaster's office. She walked in to find not just the headmaster waiting, but Nicholas Kingsley himself. He didn't stand, he didn't need to. His presence filled the room like smoke. "Talia Brooks," the headmaster began, his tone overly formal, "we've received concerns about your interactions with Aloan Kingsley." Talia's pulse thundered in her ears. She glanced at Nicholas, but his face was unreadable. "Sir, I..." Nicholas raised a hand, silencing her instantly. His voice, when he finally spoke, was smooth but deadly. "You are a bright girl, Miss Brooks, ambitious, but ambition without discipline is dangerous." "I haven't done anything wrong," Talia said, her voice shaking. Nicholas leaned forward slightly, his gaze burning into hers. "My daughter does not need your interference. Do you understand me?" Talia's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to nod, to apologize, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But then she thought of Aloan's trembling fingers, the words she had signed, "You matter." Talia lifted her chin. "With all due respect, sir, maybe what your daughter needs is someone who actually sees her." The words were out before she could stop them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nicholas's eyes narrowed, cold fury flickering for just an instant. Then he leaned back, composed once more. "Careful, Miss Brooks," he said softly. "Shadows burn quickly when they step into the sun." When Talia left the office, her knees nearly buckled. She had challenged Nicholas Kingsley. And now she had to live with whatever came next. Talia's words in the headmaster's office haunted her. Maybe what your daughter needs is someone who actually sees her." They looped in her mind through every class, every hallway, every restless night. She hadn't meant to say them, not like that, but the truth had clawed out of her chest, raw and undeniable. And Nicholas Kingsley had heard it. That meant trouble. The trouble began quietly. First, the library stopped allowing her to borrow books due to policy. Then her lunch account was mysteriously frozen, leaving her tray confiscated at the cafeteria line. By Friday, her locker had been reassigned without warning and her textbooks were misplaced. None of it was coincidence. It was a message. Nicholas Kingsley didn't need to yell or threaten. His power trickled through the school like poison, bending rules until they broke around her. But Talia refused to bend with them. She ate crackers from her backpack when lunch was denied. She studied late in the public library when Crestwood barred her access. She borrowed notebooks from Aloan, who slipped them into her hands like secret contraband. Every act of survival became rebellion. But rebellion came with fear. One night, Talia found her mother sitting at the table holding another envelope. Her hands shook as she passed it across. Talia unfolded the letter and felt her heart stop. Final notice, tuition balance due. Her scholarship covered most of the cost, but not all. Nicholas didn't have to cut her out directly, he just had to squeeze the edges until the cracks grew wide enough for her to fall through. "Talia," her mother whispered, eyes wet, "we can't do this anymore, not without help." Talia clenched the paper, fury burning through her. She knew exactly who was behind this. Nicholas Kingsley wasn't just pushing her out of Crestwood, he was crushing her mother under the weight of his war. And for what? Because she dared to see his daughter. Her fists shook. "I'm not leaving," she whispered, "not yet." At Crestwood, Aloan noticed. She always noticed. One afternoon, she cornered Talia in the music room, her hands moving fast, urgent. "He is hurting you, because of me." Talia shook her head. "It's not your fault." "Yes," Aloan signed fiercely, her movements sharp enough to cut. "If you stay near me, he will destroy you." Talia's throat tightened, then let him try. Aloan froze, her pale eyes locked onto Talia's, wide with something between awe and terror. Slowly her hands rose again, softer now. "Why?" Talia hesitated, then she signed clumsily, her motions stiff but clear enough. "Because you are worth it." Aloan's lips trembled. She pressed her palms to her face, shaking. When she lowered them, her cheeks were wet with silent tears. She signed only 2 words back, "Thank you." But Aloan wasn't just grateful. She was changing. The girl who once sat silent and still now started to push back. She refused to let Cameron and Leela mock her without answering, her hands flashing with signs sharp enough that even without translation the venom was clear. She raised her hand in class for the first time, startling her teachers, and wrote bold answers on the board when they fumbled to interpret her silence. And late at night, she texted Talia from a burner phone she had bought in secret, words flooding the screen. "He thinks I can't fight, he's wrong." Talia stared at the glowing screen in her dark bedroom, her chest tight. Aloan wasn't just stepping into the light, she was daring her father to see her. And Talia knew Nicholas would notice soon enough. He noticed the very next week. Crestwood announced a mandatory dinner event, an annual gala where students and parents gathered to showcase the school's community. For most, it was a chance to flaunt wealth. For Talia, it was a nightmare. Her mother couldn't afford a gown, they could barely keep the lights on. But when she told Aloan she wasn't going, Aloan's hands slammed the table in protest. "You must, I need you there." Talia shook her head. "Aloan, I can't, I don't belong at something like that." Aloan leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Neither do I, but together we will." And for the first time, Talia saw it, the fire in Aloan, the same fire that lived in her own chest. 2 shadows ready to defy the sun. The night of the gala arrived. The gymnasium had been transformed into a ballroom, chandeliers casting golden light across silk-draped tables. Parents glided in gowns and suits, laughter clinking like glassware. Talia stood awkwardly near the edge, wearing her mother's old dress, hem too short, fabric faded. But when Aloan entered, the room hushed. Her gown was ivory silk, simple but breathtaking. Her hair shimmered under the chandeliers, and though her chin was tilted proudly, her hands twitched nervously at her sides. Nicholas Kingsley followed behind her, immaculate in a black suit, his presence swallowing the room. His hand rested possessively on her shoulder. But Alohan's eyes sought only one thing. Talia. When their gazes met, Alohan smiled and slipped free of her father's grip. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she crossed the room, her gown whispering against the floor. She stopped in front of Talia, her pale eyes glowing, and signed a single word. Together. And before Nicholas could move, Alohan reached out and grabbed Talia's hand. The ballroom froze. Whispers flared like wildfire, parents stared, students gawked, and Nicholas Kingsley's face darkened, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. But Alohan didn't flinch. She lifted their joined hands high, daring the world to look. And in that moment, the shadow and the silence stood in the light together. But Nicholas Kingsley was not a man who tolerated rebellion. His smile was calm, too calm. And Talia knew then, whatever came next, it would not be gentle. The ballroom whispers hadn't faded by morning. They clung to the halls of Crestwood like perfume gone sour. Did you see her? The Kingsley girl holding that one's hand. He looked ready to snap her in two. The story spun itself before breakfast was even served. By lunch, every corner of the school buzzed with scandal. Nicholas Kingsley's daughter had defied him, and worse, she had done it publicly with her. Talia felt the shift immediately. Teachers who once praised her fell quiet, avoiding her gaze. Assignments went missing in the system. Her name was dropped from the honor roll list without explanation. And when she stepped into the cafeteria, trays stopped clattering, heads turned. The whispers were sharper now, cutting her down to bone. Does she think she's one of us? Leela smirked from across the room, her voice pitched just high enough. Or is she just trying to marry into money? Cameron laughed so loud it made the walls vibrate. Talia clenched her fists, her pulse roaring in her ears. She wanted to scream, to fight, to shove their cruelty back into their throats. But she didn't, because the truth was worse. This wasn't about Leela. Or Cameron or any of them. This was Nicholas. That night her mother found her staring at another letter. This one wasn't about tuition, it was worse. It was an eviction notice. 30 days, her mother whispered, voice shaking. We've been behind on rent, but this came too fast, Talia, too fast to be chance. Talia closed her eyes. She didn't need to ask how. Nicholas's reach was endless. Money turned gears faster than time. Her mother broke into sobs, clutching her head. We'll have to leave, Talia, we'll have to. No. The word came from Talia's chest like stone breaking. She stood, fists trembling. We're not leaving, not like this. Her mother looked up, stunned. What can you possibly do against him? Talia didn't answer because she didn't know. But she knew one thing, Nicholas Kingsley wanted her gone, and if she left now, she'd be proving him right. Alohan knew too. She cornered Talia the next morning, dragging her into the empty art studio. Her hands moved so fast they blurred. He is doing this, my father, the eviction, everything. Talia swallowed hard. I know. Alohan's pale eyes burned. Then let me fight him. Talia shook her head. Alohan, you don't understand. If you go against him, He already does, Alohan cut in, her signs sharp with rage. Every day he controls me, tells me who I can be, who I cannot be. He thinks my silence is weakness, but I am not weak. Her hands trembled, but her gaze didn't falter. You gave me strength, Talia, now let me use it. For the first time, Talia saw not just a girl bound by silence, but a storm waiting to break. The storm came sooner than expected. At the next school assembly, Nicholas Kingsley stood before the entire student body, his suit crisp, his smile razor-thin. I want to remind you all, he said smoothly, his voice echoing across the polished auditorium, that Crestwood is a place of tradition, of excellence, of values that cannot be compromised. Every word was aimed at her. His gaze swept the crowd until it landed on Talia. For a moment, the room dissolved. It was only him and her. And then Alohan stood. Gasps rippled through the students as she walked to the stage, her ivory dress flowing like a banner of defiance. She climbed the steps and stood beside her father, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Nicholas froze. Alohan raised her hands and signed. You talk about values, what about truth, what about freedom, what about your own daughter's voice? The interpreter hesitated, glancing at Nicholas. His glare was a warning sharp enough to draw blood, but Alowan's eyes pinned him in place, demanding he speak. And he did, word for word. The crowd erupted, whispers flared, shock spreading like fire. Never had anyone seen Alowan Kingsley defy her father so publicly. Nicholas's jaw tightened, his mask cracking for the first time. Talia's chest pounded. She wanted to leap from her seat to cheer, to shield Alowan from the storm she had just unleashed. But she knew this was only the beginning. Nicholas Kingsley had been embarrassed once at the gala. Now his daughter had humiliated him before the entire school. And Nicholas was not a man who lost twice. The assembly ended in chaos. Teachers scrambled to restore order, students whispered like sparks in dry grass, and Nicholas Kingsley's polished smile shattered into something darker, sharper. He didn't lash out on stage. No, Nicholas was far too controlled for that. Instead, he placed a firm hand on Alowan's shoulder, guiding her off the stage with a grip that looked gentle to everyone else, but Talia, watching, saw the steel in his fingers. Alowan flinched. And that was when Talia realized Nicholas wasn't going to silence her here, he was going to wait, and when he struck, no one would see it coming. The waiting didn't last long. By the next morning, Talia's scholarship had been revoked. No explanation. Just a curt letter slipped into her locker, effective immediately. Crestwood Academy withdraws your financial aid. Her chest caved in when she read it. Her mother would never afford tuition. Without the scholarship, she was gone. She stumbled out of the building, the words blurring before her eyes, and that's when she saw him. Nicholas Kingsley. Leaning casually against his black town car, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. He looked less like a father and more like a general inspecting the battlefield. "Miss Brooks," he said smoothly, his voice a weapon coated in silk, "walk with me." Every instinct screamed no, but refusing wasn't an option. She followed him toward the car, her legs weak. "You've caused quite the disruption," Nicholas continued, not looking at her. "Alowan is impressionable, vulnerable. She latches on to things she shouldn't." He stopped, turning his gaze on her fully now. His eyes were ice, unblinking. "You don't belong here, Miss Brooks. Crestwood is not a place for charity cases." Talia's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to throw his cruelty back in his face, but the words stuck. Nicholas leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Leave quietly and I'll see that your mother's financial troubles disappear. Stay, and I promise you what you've seen so far will feel merciful." Talia's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. He straightened, smoothing his tie as if the conversation were nothing more than business. "Think carefully, for your mother's sake." And then he was gone, sliding into the backseat of his car as the driver pulled away. Talia stood frozen, her hands trembling. For the first time, she understood just how dangerous Nicholas Kingsley truly was. It wasn't about scholarships or rent. He had power to crush her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. But then, a hand touched hers. She turned. Alowan stood there, eyes blazing, fists clenched. She must have seen it all. Her hands moved in sharp, deliberate signs. "He will not win." Talia shook her head, tears threatening. "Alowan, you don't understand. He'll destroy us." But Alowan only stepped closer, her chin lifted, defiance etched into every line of her face. "Then we fight together." That night, Alowan didn't go home. Instead, she slipped through the back gate of the Kingsley estate and appeared at Talia's small apartment. Her presence was like a flare in the dark. Her expensive dress was torn at the hem, her hair messy from the climb, but her eyes were alive. Talia gaped. "Alowan, what are you doing here? Your father will." "He doesn't notice me," Alowan signed almost bitterly. "Not until I disobey, and tonight I choose where I belong." Talia's mother, exhausted from her shifts, blinked in confusion when she saw the billionaire's daughter sitting at their tiny kitchen table. But when Alowan offered to help chop vegetables for dinner, her hands clumsy but eager, something softened in the room. For the first time, Alowan wasn't invisible, she was family. But Nicholas noticed her absence sooner than anyone expected. By dawn, Crestwood was buzzing again. Security guards swarmed the gates. Teachers whispered about police involvement, and Nicholas himself appeared on campus, his expression thunderous, his voice clipped as he demanded answers. Eloan walked in minutes later, head high, Talia beside her. The air snapped with tension. Nicholas's gaze locked on them both, Eloan now. But Eloan didn't move. She lifted her hands instead, signing with deliberate precision, each word striking like a drum beat. I am not your shadow, I am not your silence, and I will not disappear. The interpreter froze, glancing at Nicholas, but Eloan's stare burned so fiercely that the words came out anyway. The students erupted in whispers. Nicholas's mask cracked again, his jaw tight, his nostrils flared. He turned slowly to Talia, his voice cold enough to frost glass. This is your doing. Talia's chest clenched, but before she could answer, Eloan stepped in front of her, protective, unyielding. For the first time, Nicholas Kingsley's own daughter shielded someone else from him. And in that moment, everyone in the room saw it. Nicholas was losing control. But Nicholas Kingsley was not a man who lost. And as his eyes narrowed, Talia knew this was no longer about scholarships or whispers, this was war. The silence after Eloan's defiance was thick enough to choke on. Nicholas's face didn't move, but his eyes, those icy shards of blue, were colder than winter itself. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply turned, his polished shoes striking the marble floor, and walked out of the assembly without another word. But Talia felt it in her bones. The storm hadn't passed, it was only gathering strength. The storm broke that evening. Talia came home from school to find two uniformed officers waiting outside her building. Her mother stood on the stoop, her face pale, her hands trembling as she clutched a folded notice. Mom, Talia's voice cracked. Her mother's lips quivered. They say someone reported me, fraud, at the diner. They think I've been stealing from the register. What? Talia's chest squeezed. That's insane, you've worked there for years, you'd never. They said there's proof, Talia, proof I can't fight. Her mother's voice broke. I don't know how, but I know who. Nicholas. Talia felt the name like poison in her blood. The next day at Crestwood, whispers followed her like shadows. Did you hear? Her mom's getting investigated. She might go to jail. Talia sat through classes numb, her hands shaking so hard she couldn't grip her pen. Every glance from a teacher, every smirk from Cameron and Leela was another nail in her coffin. At lunch, Eloan found her. She didn't sit. She grabbed Talia's hand and pulled her toward the library. Her movements were sharp, urgent. In the quiet between the shelves, Eloan signed furiously. What happened? Talia's throat closed. She tried to speak, but the words crumbled. Tears spilled instead, hot and angry. Eloan's hands stilled. Then slowly she reached up and touched Talia's cheek, gentle, steady. Her pale eyes locked onto hers, and when she signed again, the words were fire. He cannot break you, he cannot break us. Talia wanted to believe it, but Nicholas wasn't just breaking them. He was dismantling their lives piece by piece. That night, Eloan made her boldest move yet. She left the Kingsley mansion with nothing but a backpack and a notebook. For the second time, she showed up at Talia's apartment, this time with a determination that looked like steel. Her fingers flew. He is my father, but he is not my master. If he wants war, then he'll have to see me fight. Talia's mother looked between the two girls, fear etched into every line of her face. Sweetheart, if Nicholas finds out you're here. Eloan shook her head, her eyes burning. He already knows, he sees everything, but this time he'll see the truth too. The truth came crashing in faster than they expected. 2 nights later, pounding rattled their apartment door. Not the polite knock of neighbors, this was thunder, fists slamming hard enough to make the walls shake. Talia froze. Her mother pressed a trembling hand to the door. Who is it? A voice boomed back, Child Protective Services. We've had reports of neglect and unsafe living conditions. Talia's stomach dropped. She knew instantly who was behind it. Nicholas had escalated again, pulling strings that reached into every corner of the system. Her mother's face crumpled. They can take you, Talia, they can take you away from me. No, Talia's voice shook, but her spine straightened. No, Mom, they can't, I won't let them. Behind her, Eloan stood still, her pale eyes sharp, her fists trembling at her sides. When she signed, her hands were weapons. Then we fight louder, we make them hear us. The next morning, Talia walked into Crestwood with her head held higher than it had ever been, though her insides quaked. Eloan walked beside her, unflinching. Gasps followed them down the hall. Leela whispered something cruel under her breath, but for once, Talia didn't even flinch. Because she wasn't alone. At the far end of the corridor, Nicholas Kingsley stood waiting. His tailored suit gleamed, his posture erect, his smile thin as a blade. He had pulled every string, played every card, and now, as the girls approached, it was clear he expected them to break. But Aloan lifted her hands, her movements deliberate, unshaking. You think silence is power, but silence is your prison, and I will never live in it again. The interpreter spoke her words aloud, the sound carrying through the hushed corridor like thunder. For the first time, Nicholas's mask fractured, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, his control slipped. And in that crack, Talia saw it: weakness. Nicholas Kingsley was powerful, but he was not invincible. And he had underestimated them both. But as they walked past him, his voice followed, low and venomous. This isn't over. You think you've won, but I promise you, I haven't even begun. Talia's blood ran cold. Because Nicholas wasn't bluffing. And whatever came next would be worse. The days that followed felt like walking on the edge of a blade. Talia barely slept, her dreams filled with knocking doors and cold blue eyes. Her mother moved like a ghost through their apartment, waiting for the next blow to fall. And Aloan was fire contained in fragile glass, ready to shatter at any second. Nicholas had promised war, and war came. It began with a lawsuit. Papers slid under their apartment door one morning, thick with official stamps and words Talia didn't understand. Defamation, harassment, endangerment of a minor. Her mother's hands shook as she read. He's suing me, Talia. He's suing us for things we never even did. If this goes through, we could lose everything. The world tilted beneath Talia's feet. Nicholas wasn't just trying to scare them, he was trying to erase them. But that night, as despair pressed in heavy and suffocating, Aloan set her notebook on the table. Her pale eyes burned with a determination that made Talia's chest ache. She wrote in careful letters, "We don't hide, we show the world." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Crestwood's annual Founders Banquet was the most anticipated event of the year. Politicians, CEOs, trustees, all the people who mattered gathered under the glittering chandeliers to toast the school's legacy. And Nicholas Kingsley, of course, was the centerpiece. He would speak, he would be applauded, he would remind everyone why his name carried weight heavier than stone. Unless someone took that stage from him. The night of the banquet, Talia's hands shook as she adjusted her uniform. They didn't belong here, she knew it. Everyone would know it. But when Aloan slipped her hand into hers, squeezing tight, the trembling steadied. They walked into the ballroom together, heads turned, whispers hissed. Nicholas's jaw tightened when he saw them, but he didn't move, not yet. The speeches began, applause thundered, and then Nicholas rose. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as polished steel, "it is my honor to stand before you as both benefactor and father. Crestwood represents the future, our children, our traditions, our..." The microphone cut. Gasps rippled, heads turned. And then Aloan stepped onto the stage. Her hands moved, steady, sharp, unflinching. "This is the truth." The interpreter hesitated, then spoke her words aloud, his voice trembling at first, then steadying as the weight of them filled the room. "My father teaches silence. He wears power like a crown, but power without love is cruelty. Power without compassion is nothing. He tells the world I am broken, but I am not. I am whole, I am strong, and I will not be invisible anymore." The room erupted in murmurs, cameras flashed, phones rose discreetly, recording every word. Nicholas surged forward, his face a mask of fury. "Aloan, enough." But Aloan only lifted her chin higher. Her hands moved again, fierce as lightning. "And I am not alone." Talia stepped up beside her, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. "He tried to break us, he's tried to silence us, but you all need to see the truth. Nicholas Kingsley would rather bury his daughter's voice than admit she has won." The words cracked like thunder. For the first time, Nicholas faltered. His eyes darted to the crowd, faces he once controlled with money and influence, now staring back with doubt, with suspicion, with something dangerously close to disgust. Whispers turned sharper. Is it true? Did he silence her? Did he frame that girl's mother? The empire Nicholas built was trembling, stone by stone. Security rushed forward, but it was too late. The room had seen, the room had heard, and Nicholas Kingsley's silence could no longer smother the truth. The fallout was brutal. By morning, recordings of Alohan's speech had spread like wildfire. News outlets dissected every word, whispers of corruption, threats, lawsuits, all tied to Nicholas-dominated headlines. The lawsuit against Talia's mother evaporated overnight. Procedural error, they called it, everyone knew better. Nicholas retreated behind closed doors, his empire crumbling under scrutiny. But Alohan, for the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She walked into Crestwood with her head high, her hands moving freely, her silence louder than thunder. Students stared, but not with pity, with respect. And Talia walked beside her, no longer the shadow, no longer forgot. They weren't broken, they weren't weak. They were survivors, fighters, friends. And together they had turned silence into strength. Power built on fear will always crumble. True strength isn't in money or silence or control. It's in being seen, it's in being heard, and sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.